Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Board Explorer Live in the afternoon here in the UK at 2 p.m. And I am going to be reading a new book today. It's called Two Englands by H.V. Morton. We finished Narrowboat yesterday. Good evening to Steve G. Nice to see you there. That's the wrong side. That's the cover of this version of the book. It is the story of H.G. Morton, his last glimpse of pre-war England and his first impressions of England at war in 1939. It says here, in May 1939, H.V. Morton, having decided that war with Germany was inevitable, felt compelled to make a journey round the country to catch what he thought might be a last glimpse of pre-war England. He explored the countryside, the villages and stately homes which he felt might be changed or lost forever, recounting the history that they had seen and talking to local people. Morton's second journey took place in October 1939, when he recorded his impressions of a country at war, an England of munition factories, blackouts, prisoner of war camps, and the Home Guard. 50 years later, Tommy Candler has retraced Morton's steps, taking photographs, which he has placed in the book as he goes along. So there's photographs as well, but not so much worried about that. Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and how are you all? It's a bit windier down here in Worthing. I have been out filming, and it's a bit cooler, which is why I've got my Harris tweed jacket on. So nice to see you. Hello to English Andy. Hello to Turbo Stream, to Graham Roffey, to Ed Loud, who's waving loudly, to Mike Stevens, to the lovely Julia, to Ben Reeve, and anybody else who happens to come along. I've been out filming this morning, but have had a disaster. Some of the footage, oh no, out of focus. I know exactly how you feel when it happens like that. And Stephen Field is there. Hello to you. And Rita Loy, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Another book to start our day. Steve from Ottawa in Canada. Lovely place, Canada. I've never been, but I gather it is a lovely day. So chapter 1, this is what he says at the beginning of this. He says, I set off in May 1939 to enjoy what I think will be the last glimpse of pre-war England. I go to Kent. I visit Kubek House at Westerham, Hever Castle, where Anne Boleyn lived, Chevening, the home of Lady Hester Stanhope, Penhurst, the home of Sir Philip Sidney, and Knowle, the home of the Sackvilles. These great families of which I have to say I am relatively ignorant. So hopefully one will learn a few things as we go. So I'm hoping that you can hear me all right. Might as well press on. And also this has got glare on it because it's printed in one of those books that is using art paper. I need to go back and shoot the bits again, says Turbo Stream. Blowing a gale in Birmingham. Yes, it's blowing a gale in down here in Sussex, and I'm just feeling very, very cold. I'm not sure why. Obviously the body had acclimatized to warmer climates, and now it's gone very cold. Julia says the sun has just come out here. Still a bit blustery every now and then, though. Yes, seems blustery inside. I can't get my bones warm. It's cold in the studio. Never mind. We will persevere. So, this is chapter 1. In May 1939, I found myself with some time to spare, and I decided to go away and lose myself in England. It was the moment when the King and the Queen, approaching the coasts of Canada in a fog, had temporarily banished the town of Danzig from the front page, and when the laurel wreath which Mr. Chamberlain had worn since Munich was becoming rather shabby. Ministers were busy making apologetic speeches to warn the country that perhaps, after all, appeasement might not work. the Home Secretary had told the House that it was proposed to darken London at a convenient time in the early evenings of the morning so that airmen might go up and see how much of it was visible. Mr. Morrison of the London County Council had described a voluntary scheme for the removal from London of school children, the scheme for removal from London of school children, infants and blind persons, and the Secretary of State of War had announced that the date of the first call-up of militiamen, which was to be in June. The public, aware that an age of spells and incantations had been succeeded by a period of impending doom, held on to its gas masks, which had been issued during the Munich crisis of the preceding autumn, and hoped for the best. The parks were scarred by lines of trenches, chemist shops featured window displays of lint and splints, and the words decontaminate and evacuate had passed out of medical language into common speech. Yet the country was technically at peace. In London, life was heaven for rumour-mongers. In London, life was heaven for rumour-mongers, gossipers and theorists, all of whom spoke their minds with the dogmatism of ignorance. Whenever I went out, I encountered somebody who had just returned from the continent with certain information that was all bluff, and there would be no war, or others who were equally certain that before the year was out, we should be at war. So what was I to believe? I thought it would be a good thing to get away from London. No one knew what was going to happen, and it was pointless to go on listening to theories and speculations. If war should come, I said to myself, I should dearly love to have had a last glimpse of pre-war England, the second pre-war England of my generation. And if, after all, it did not come, what would be finer than a journey through England in the spring? So upon the 17th of May, I stood at the window of my house in Chelsea, ready to depart, watching a rainstorm of remarkable violence sweep over the square. It was too fierce to last. I had no definite plans, except that I wanted to go to Kent, a county about which I knew practically nothing. As I threaded my way through the traffic of that morning and waited, vibrating and motionless in the traffic jams, my spirits began to rise, and I felt more cheerful than I had been for weeks. I think it was at the Elephant and Castle that I was held up for a long time by a line of lorries loaded with gas cylinders. As I passed through Lewisham, the sun was pitilessly illuminating the tall houses of Georgian brick and Regency stucco, which have come down in the world to a shabby life divided of flats and tenements. And I noticed in front gardens here and there, if I dare call those snooty strips by such a name, uneasy mounds and tumuli roofed with galvanized tin. In those soggy depths, the householders proposed to take refuge if war came. The old black houses glazed down on those dugouts with an expression of amazement, and I too was amazed. I never thought the Ypres salient would be reborn in a London garden. I went on thinking that all of God's creatures... that of all of God's creatures, humanity has most skill in adapting itself to changing conditions. Who would have believed that in 1939 suburban rockeries would conceal dugouts, or that mothers would play games with gas masks in order that small children might think those sinister gifts amusing additions to the home and no longer show fear at the sight of them. Makes you wonder whether teachers at the moment are going to be playing games with masks that they have to wear at school so that when the kids go back because of COVID, they won't be frightened of grown-ups wearing those masks. We have accepted the unthinkable with resignation. That is the distinctive quality of this age, and whether the future were to be bright or grim, this year in England would be like no other we had ever known. Very true. The road to Kent, or at least the one I had taken, is clogged with traffic until you reach Bromley, where there are a few uncertain-looking fields. At Bromley Common, a real country thrush was singing in the trees of Holy Trinity Churchyard, and I turned right along Oakley Road, where a signpost said it was only 8 miles to Westerham. I came to a hill and saw a large portion of Kent lying before me. There was an oast house on the curve of a hill to the left, and a dark wood on the right. Far ahead was spread a checkerboard of fields, lying to the very sky, and soon I was running downhill towards the town of Westerham. Westerham wears an air of age and quality. On the town green, which slopes gracefully downhill, I saw the statue of a man waving a sword. He wears a long-waisted coat to his knees, a peruke and a tricorn hat. He is not waving his sword defiantly or dramatically, which is remarkable because, as you will agree, it is difficult not to wave a sword in either one or two of those ways. And if you've studied the stone and bronze swordmans, who are lavishly scattered around the world, you'd perhaps also agree that defiant and dramatic attitudes, especially in Latin countries, can become monotonous and irritating, so that the mild swordsman is a restful and unusual addition to any town. In Kubek, for instance, which I shall always think of as a city of in Kubek, for instance, which I shall always think of as a city of preposterously active statues, every other street has its lunging, painting swordsman, some at the last gasp on their knees, others with their mouths open in ecstasy of leadership, and all of them lunging and pointing with tremendous verve and enthusiasm at passers-by. Could Don Quixote have visited Quebec, he would have been fighting a perpetual chain of duels with the great departed, who leaned down as if to attack a man who was about to buy a newspaper or to threaten the existence of a harmless visitor to the post office. Even politicians in Quebec are charitably depicted in the act of doing something, unlike our own sombre standers and sitters. They are either making speeches or signing treaties, aided by the leaping and flying figures of hope, faith, and victory, who gamble in the air around and about them in the best tradition of Gaelic Baroque. Thinking of those furiously active immortals in Quebec, I approached the tame but elegant swordsman of Westerham and read with a smile that he was none other than General James Wolfe, the hero of Quebec. It's a good statue and an excellent likeness. Wolfe's sharp, rather peaky features have been admirably portrayed, and although, as I've said, there is nothing dramatic in the way he lifts his sword, as if to smack a reluctant battery mule upon the hindquarters, there is dramatic appeal in the isolation of his graceful figure against the sky of his native town. He stands there, it seems, not in the centre of Kentish market town, but high upon the plains of Abraham. And if you'd like to see a picture of said statue, there he is. What I need is a camera sort of mounted here, really. Let me have a slurp. How is everybody? I'm obviously just trying to get into the mode of the fella's writing. I think sometimes it takes a bit of while to sort of get into the mode, so my reading may adapt itself a little bit. as I'm trying to sort of lose Rolt and his mode of speaking and try and understand how Morton speaks. Unlike prophets, soldiers are rarely forgotten in their country towns, partly perhaps because they offer the sculpture some scope for effect, and certainly Wolfe has not been forgotten in Westerham. His figure is the most prominent object in the town. There is a Wolfe Cafe and a Wolfe Garage. The wall of the George and Dragon proudly announces that Wolfe once stayed there, and any passer-by can direct you to Wolfe's house. I discovered, however, that in the bar of the George and Dragon they were less interested in Wolfe than in the demolition of the great mansion, which, for some reason or other, probably taxation and death duties, had been pulled down brick by brick and sold in Westerham Cattle Market. A little man in a tweed suit put down his glass of beer and informed the company that Mr. Winston Churchill, who lives at Chartwell Manor, near Westerham, had bought some of the bricks and tiles. "He's very fond of bricklaying, he is," explained the little man. I wandered out into Westerham churchyard, where I had a superb view of the Upper Derwent Valley, and over the neighbouring chalk downs. There were brown and white cows lying. Oh, I see what he says. There were brown and white cows lying on the green. There were brown and white cows lying on the breen. There were brown and white. There were doo-doos. There were brown and white cows lying on the green pincushion hills. I was disappointed by the church, whose interior, much altered and messed about by restorers, does not fulfil the promise of a lovely exterior. I thought I would go and have a look at the house they call Kubek House, where Wolfe lived when he was a little boy. It now belongs to the National Trust and stands a few yards out of town at the bottom of the hilly road leading to Sevenoaks, a dignified mansion of Kent brick with 3 gables and 3 stories. Wolfe was not born in this house, but in the vicarage, which his father, a colonel in the army, had rented from the vicar. The family moved to Kubek House when Wolfe was an infant, and they remained there for about 10 years. As I stood on the step waiting for the bell to be answered, I thought that the building had assumed the benign, motherly air of a genuine birthplace. The door was opened by a middle-aged lady in cheerful chintz all over. She also wore the smile of polite resignation, which I have noted upon the faces of those who inhabit National Trust properties and are accordingly obliged at certain times to admit to their dwellings all kinds of people, good, bad, and indifferent, wise men and fools. I was shown into the panelled hall and into a panelled room to the right, which was full of relics. It's difficult to say what degree of fame must be achieved by a hero before such objects as 8 table knives, 8 table forks, and 1 carving fork, formerly in the possession of the Wolfe family, ceased to be ridiculous when placed in a glass case. But hero worship is profound and deep-seated emotion, and it is undoubtedly true that many people who have no interest in Wolfe at all and could give you no clear idea of his life and achievements would have probably gazed with reverence at those knives and forks. While I was reading the labels on these and such-like relics, we were joined by a second lady in middle age and also in chintz overall, and before long the 3 of us were all good friends, and I was shown many rooms in the Wolfe mansion which are not usually open to visitors. It must have been an old house even when Mrs. Wolfe went to live there in 1727, but like many such houses, it was brought up to date in the 18th century and its original antiquity concealed. The ladies took me into rooms and up dark stairways where the young Wolfe must have played creepy and exciting games with his brother Edward. The 2 little boys and their mother were often alone, for their father was generally away with his regiment. I was glad to have seen those rooms and passages, for I can now picture Wolfe not upon the silent St. Lawrence in the darkness of the night, but as a delicate, pale little boy in the silence and darkness of that old house. How extraordinary alike were Wolfe and Nelson, both frail and delicate children, and never robust as men, both of them nervous, quick, emotional, and talkative, possessing too that rare quality that caused them to be worshipped by common soldiers and sailors who served under them, and, at last, meeting the two most dramatic deaths in British history, expiring in the moment of their triumph as if upon a stage. Perhaps they are both throwbacks to an earlier England, maybe to an emotional Tudor England, when men boasted and bragged and were unashamed to shed a tear. Already in their time the upper-class English was, I suspect, altering. He was already on his way to public school, and it's interesting to remember that upon the two notable occasions, both Wolfe and Nelson were considered by certain of their contemporaries to have behaved in a manner not befitting the dignity of gentlemen. Before Wolfe sailed for America, he dined with Pitt and Temple, and it is said that after dinner, worked up by the thought of a great mission that lay before him, he drew his sword and, to the embarrassment of his hosts, burst into a storm of gasconade and bravado, which shocked them profoundly. But I am willing to wager that neither Shakespeare, Drake, or Raleigh would have been shocked or embarrassed by such behaviour. Nelson had precisely the same effect on the Duke of Wellington, upon the only occasion that the two great men met. It was in the waiting room of the Colonel's office in Downing Street. The Duke entered the room and saw the little man with one arm waiting there. He recognised Nelson, and as the Duke himself described this meeting, Nelson entered at once into conversation with me, if I can call it conversation, for it was almost all on his side and all about himself, and in really so vain and so silly as to surprise and almost disgust me. No doubt that the Duke would have been equally disgusted by all the other Elizabethans. It would indeed be interesting to know the precise period in history when it became ungentlemanly for English to cry in public, or to boast, or brag, or indulge in picturesque rhetoric. In other words, the precise moment when the strong, silent, public school Englishman became the masculine pattern of English conduct. Such were the thoughts that passed through my mind as I explored Kubek House with the two ladies in chintz overalls. Oh, chintz overalls. I thought he said that she was in chintz overall, but it's in chintz overalls. We came in time to the most interesting of all relics, a page, elegant Flemish... not a page, it's quite small text, this. We came in time to the most interesting of all the relics, a pale, elegant Flemish dressing gown in which Wolfe's body was brought home from Canada to be buried at Greenwich. That garment hangs there like a ghost, and really has something painful and tragic about it. As I looked at it, I remembered the line of boats that floated down the dark river I remembered the line of boats that floated down a dark river in a silent, unbroken, save for a splash of the oar. What do you mean? Again, it's a sentence that I haven't missed. As I looked at it, I remembered the line of boats that floated down a dark river in a silence, unbroken, save for a splash of an oar. Got it, thank you. Our history books all say that, as the troops were carried down the St. Lawrence, the soldier who was soon to die was heard to repeat in a low voice, "The paths to glory lead but to the grave." Then, turning to his officers, added, "Gentlemen, I would rather have written that poem than beat the French tomorrow." There is some reason, I don't know what he's on about here, there is some reason to doubt the truth of that fine story. There is evidence that Wolfe quoted Gray's elegy, elegy, not as the troops were moving out to scale the heights of Abraham, but on a previous afternoon, when he made a reconnaissance from a boat in order to find a way up the steep cliffs. He'd had a foreboding that he would not survive the action, and the night before he called a friend to him and crossed his fear. I didn't cross his fear at all. He had a foreboding that he would not survive the action, and the night before he called a friend to him and confessed his fear, entrusting him to a miniature of Catherine Lowther, the girl whom he hoped to marry. Wolfe was wounded 3 times. At first he was shot in the wrist, but wrapping a handkerchief round the wound, he continued to command the action. He was then shot just as he had given the order to charge, and again he carried on, believing, as he had once said, that while a man is able to do his duty and can stand and hold his arms, it is infamous to retire. But in the heat of the battle he received a shot in the breast and was unable to stand any longer. His first anxiety was to conceal his plight from the troops. "Support me," he whispered to an officer. "Do not let my brave fellows see me fall. The day is ours. Keep it." It was believed at the time that Wolfe had received his fatal wound from one of his own men, a sergeant whom he had reduced to the ranks for striking a private. This ruffian deserted the French and was afterwards known to boast that he had shot Wolfe, but whether this is true or not we shall never know. When it became known that he lay dead upon the plains of Abraham, the grief of his men was swiftly transformed into fury. They charged the French like madmen. Exactly the opposite occurred to the French when they knew that their leader, Montcalm, was mortally wounded. They lost heart and went to pieces. Thinking of this battle and the difference between the French and the English, I remembered that the French Canadians in Quebec preserved the mummified head of Montcalm, and you can see it, as I have seen it, at the Ursuline convent there, Ursuline convent even. I remember being shown to the visitors' room, which is divided from the nunnery by a screen of metal bars. An elderly nun, whose smooth face all complexity had vanished, approached the bars holding a glass case. Inside was Montcalm's brown and grinning head. It had been varnished, and it looked horrible. "The head of the brave Montcalm," whispered the nun, and then, bowing, disappeared with her ghastly relic. Having shown me all the Wolfe treasures in the Kubek House, the 2 ladies took me into a room which was probably the old kitchen. It had an immense fireplace in which you could roast an ox. Looking up the chimney, I saw it had been boarded, and I said that no doubt this had been done to stop the draught. "Oh, no," said one cheerfully. "That's not the reason why we boarded it up. This is the gas-proof room. Oh, this is our gas-proof room. You see, it has a stone floor and stone walls, and we're told by the ARP that this is the best room in the house for the purpose. We have to make the windows absolutely gas-proof." I came back from the savage age of Wolfe to our civilized era and looked with interest at first the gas-proof room that I had seen. I looked with interest at the first gas-proof room I'd seen. It seemed utterly preposterous that 2 charming ladies in chintz overalls should, in the year 1939, be preparing to save themselves from poisoned gas. I wondered what Wolfe, who was always very outspoken on military matters, would have said could he have known the true significance of the boarded chimney in the kitchen at Westerham. I said goodbye and found my way in a few miles to Edenbridge, which lies to the south. Here, between the 2 roads, is a large area of beautiful country, some 8 miles long by 4 miles wide. It is watered by the Medway and by the Eden, and it is easy to become lost in the intricacy of its lanes. And so that's a pause moment there I hope I'm reading it all right. Hope that makes some sort of sense. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Richard, I'm on my way back to Lewisham that you mentioned in the book. Oh, are you? Well, there you go. Stephen Field, I've been to the Plains of Abraham. Good brewery in Westerham. Is there? Nice. Thank you, Graham. I'll have to go and have a look. The French in Kubek are still pissed, are they? I've not really heard of this wolf, to be honest with you. How shameful should I be? Probably very. Pretty funny, really. Wasn't Wolfe a general? I don't know. Was he? It's over, says Stephen Field. Yes, he was. Big battle there. Yes, I agree with the church. Oh, right. Oh, the church, that it's all Victorian on the inside. And Montcalm. Yes, I don't know how you pronounce his name. Sometimes I just can't be bothered to try. Worth a look. Wiki, the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Afternoon to Mark Donny McLeod. Nice to see you. Kubek City has cobblestone streets. Is that right? Nice. Looks like old France. Ah, well, I suppose. I suppose it would be. Hotel Frontenac is where people stay. Wellington was the perfect snob. Sounded like it. Plenty of those in the UK. Yeah, that's very good. They scaled the cliffs and surprised the French. Wolfe's copy of Gray's Elegy is now in my old university library as a central relic. Oh, is it? Nice to see you there, Diana. It's pronounced Quebec. Is it not Quebec? Oh, Quebec. Do you know, I've always called it Quebec, and when we were at Quebec. Never pronounced it Quebec. I can't. You know when you're at school and they show us Quebec. That's how I've always pronounced it. But interesting. There is an appendage with a case to cover it. What elsewhere of a what? Yes, there is an appendage with a case to cover it elsewhere of a French officer of the Legion Latarja who lost his limb in the battle. That's nice. I have ancestors who fought on both sides during Georgian times. My Irish mother's family fought for the English and the French. Welsh Wanderer, Jason Patrick. Hi, Richard. Nice to see live from Llandudno, North Wales. I don't know if I said Llandudno correctly, but I did my best. Very interesting read. Wolfe had a verse in the national anthem, does he? Right, let's try a little bit more and see where we go with this. Quite long. They're not so easy to define as chapters, so we will just see how we go. Outside in the sunlight, the cruel and frustrated face of Henry VIII gazes from the inn sign, and a few yards off is a red lodge covered with wisteria, which leads to Hever Castle, once the property of Sir Thomas Boleyn. Henry courted Anne there, and so led her out to... Henry courted Anne here, and so led her out of musical comedy into Greek tragedy. Though Hever Castle is not among the show places of Kent, I have been given permission to see it. The lodge-keeper told me to go down the path until I came to the castle, when I was to cross the drawbridge and ring a bell. I entered the park, where the birds were singing. Pheasants were running across the grass in the woods. As I walked along, I began to think of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. It was not the world's most perfect love affair, maybe, but it is perpetually interesting because of the mighty issues at stake, because of the tragedy in which it ended, and because of the great Queen of England, who was the fruit of it. It is difficult to believe that Anne was ever really in love with Henry, but there can be no doubt that at first he loved her sincerely and devotedly. His tragic search for a wife who would give him a male heir might perhaps never have begun had the infant Elizabeth been a healthy boy. And so certain was the king that Anne's child would be a boy, that he had proclamations all ready and set up in type, in which the unborn infant was... I've lost my space. The unborn infant was called Prince. Therefore, when Elizabeth was born, it was necessary for the printer hastily and clumsily to add the letters SS to the word. No child could have had a chillier reception than the great Elizabeth. I was told to pronounce it Kubek. So there we go. None of us really know. Such thoughts brought me within sight of the castle. I saw, lying on slightly lower ground at the level of the river, a crenellated grey building and a gatehouse rising above the moat. At first I was not sure that Hever was real, for it looked like some castle in a poem. It might have fallen out of the chapter of Froissart. Froissart is French. I don't know how you do French. Everything that wealth and good taste can do to bring a weary old castle back into the world had been done to Hever. It was smaller than I expected it to be, more of a medieval manor house than a castle. It is a modest, embattled home of a country knight who might never have been heard of if his daughter had not become the Queen of England. This is part of its charm. It is, if it was twice the size, it would not be so lovely to look at. Before I crossed the drawbridge, I had a good look at Hever, at the skilful, simple flower beds around the moat, at the dark maze, at the formal Elizabethan garden with its fountain, its set of gigantic yew chessmen, the dovecot rising above the tall, valetted hedges like a little Tudor houses on poles. It is not often that one sees a scene so perfect and so cleverly restrained. It is difficult to believe that art has played so great a part in the creation of this glimpse of Tudor England. I crossed the moat and rang the bell. I was taken in through the portcullis and across the cobbled courtyard, round which the castle, like many others of its period, is built. In a dining room, hung with dark tapestries, I saw the Boleyn arms over the fireplace, and the lock of the door is a peculiar and interesting object. It is a replica of a lock which the yeomen of the bedchamber carried around with them when Henry VIII travelled. Every night, before he went to bed, they fixed this special royal lock on the door of the room in which he was to spend the night. Good heavens. So many lovely rooms at Hever are almost too full of things worth looking at, for William Waldolph Astor, who bought the castle, was a great collector and liked to live with his treasures. A museum creator would have had a bad time at Hever, for the desire to place valuable and rare objects behind glass is perhaps a natural one, but I think the true charm of collecting is to forget how much things cost and to like them for themselves, and you can do this only if you live with them. I saw in one room a book of devotion, which is believed to be that which Anne Boleyn read while she was waiting for death in the Tower. It is full of marginal notes, and on one page, written presumably by her, are the words, Remember me when you do pray. Hope doth lead from day to day. This, though it may not add to her reputation as a poet, no doubt reflects the state of her mind during the horrible days before her death. Almost to the last, she thought that the king was only making her suffer in order to try her, and that he would not take away her life. Among the bedrooms at Hever is one which for centuries has been pointed out as the room in which Henry VIII stayed when he was courting Anne. From its window you look into the lovely gardens where he is supposed to first have met her. When he was able to be with her, he kept touch by letters beginning "Sweetheart" and "My own darling," and ending sometimes, like a callow youth, with the outline of a heart, inside which he drew her initials. From the gardens at Hever, which are perhaps even more beautiful than the castle, it is possible to see the most ingenious figure of restoration. I have never come across anything else like it. Lord Astor was resolved not to spoil the old castle by extending it and thus altering its proportions, yet he wished to make a lot of additional room for guests and staff. How was he to do it? He decided to build a group of Tudor guest houses some distance from the castle, but connected by a covered passage over the moat. In order to do this, it was necessary to move the River Eden into a new bed. Could any man have paid a greater compliment to an older castle? I walked back to the village again and had a look at the inn, Henry VIII. There is an interesting story about it. They say that its first name was the Bull and Butcher, but after Anne Boleyn's execution, the indignant villagers altered it to the Bull and Butchered. That, of course, did not please the king, who had the sign taken down and his own name put upon its place. But I have read somewhere that, unwilling to let him have the last word, the villagers obediently altered the name of the inn to Henry VIII, but put up as a sign a picture of the king holding a huge axe. This picture, if indeed ever existed, has long since vanished, and today a perfectly normal Henry VIII gazes towards the gates of Hever Castle. How good it is to awaken in England in the month of May, and here we are in the month of May, when the birds are singing in the early morning and the first sounds of a new day are coming through an open window. On such a morning I left the hotel where I'd spent the night and made my way through the lanes to Penshurst, the home of the Sidneys. I looked forward to seeing for the first time one of the finest houses, not only in Kent, but in England. I came to a low stone wall that ran seemingly for miles beside the road, encircling a splendid park. About half a mile off, I saw a magnificent palace of old grey stone standing among a dark group of trees. It was, fortunately, one of the days when Penshurst, like so many of the great houses in Kent, was open to the public, and a man at the gates told me that I must go down the hill and buy a ticket at the post office in Leicester Square. Leicester Square in Penshurst village is a picturesque assembly of houses and cottages. The post office sells not only stamps, dog licences and the post office doesn't just sell stamps and dog licences and other dull government matter, but bursts suddenly into a rich and romantic assortment of old glass decanters, firebacks and Persian rugs. Standing amongst this mixed cargo was an old man who wore a black skull cap. He sold me a ticket for Penshurst Place, and then I asked him, foolishly enough, I admit, whether Leicester Square in Penshurst regards itself as senior or junior to the other Leicester Square. He turned on me a look of blank amazement. "Sir," he said with dignity, "there is no question about it. This is the original Leicester Square. The Leicester Square in London was known as Leicester Fields until the time of Charles II, but this has been Leicester Square ever since Sir Robert Sidney became Earl of Leicester in 1618. Of course, sir, this is the original Leicester Square. Why, London's Leicester Square was just a rowdy place where they fought duels when our Leicester Square was at the centre of the village." I backed away from his vehemence. I shall never again walk through Leicester Square in London without thinking of it of a bit of an upstart. I might pause there. I know it's only 45 minutes. I might pause there because there seems to be a rather long bit when we get into the next bit, and I just want to. I think that would be a good place to pause. Let's just have a look at. I hope. Are you enjoying it? Is it something that interests you? Do let me know. It's quite. I'm just trying to sort of feel my way around his voice. Andrew Norris, invite us all round and we'll do the admiration you could possibly want. Grand. Linda Kane, you obviously know me too well. Love your videos, Martin Lux. Thank you very much, Martin. I assume you're talking to me. A lot of people talking to each other. Mark Donald McLeod said, I remember painting the bathroom a long time ago, gloss with white walls, with a duck egg blue ceiling. If you fleck other thin lines of colour through the white, you can make a marble effect. Marvellous. He also goes on, fixtures dipped in colour paint and gilt make the taps look gold. Ah, okay. J.W. Harville says, is there really a normal Henry VIII? That's true. Linda Kane says, I have this book and it's going to be difficult not to read it with you, Richard. A bit like reading the subtitles on an English film. Yes, you'll notice that sometimes I inadvertently, and I don't do it deliberately, but paraphrase what he's said, because I find myself lost in the sentence. And unless I sometimes, as you hear, I do stop and have to go, what do you mean? Sometimes just to get out of the sentence so that it still makes sense. I do add my own words in, but I don't mean to, I try not to do that. Alas, the departed king was not really of his own mind, not just the paranoia of the impending battles with the Catholics, but also his pox, of which he was riddled, and with gout. Enjoyed that. Thank you. Oh, marvellous. Good stuff. Morning to Ramibu. Good morning. New book I see. I need to catch up with at least 2 readings. The last 2 readings. Oh, right. Hello there, says Andrew Norris. I will try that, asking people in Penshurst Place which Leicester Square came first. There you go, Graham Roffey. Give that a whirl. I'm trying to give him a bit of a 1940s I say old chap, this is how I speak type touch, because that's the sort of feeling I'm getting from the text, where I don't want to read it too fast, but I feel he's quite pacey with his. So I do want to get into his mode of speak. So that would be good. I will make sure to point that out to everyone. Yes, thanks, Linda. Yeah, no, appreciate that. Every time I miss a word or add an S when there's a singular. Yes, I know. Have you got In Search of England? It should be on your shelf. It's not only on my shelf, it's next to my desk in the other room. I do have In Search of England. It's a very nice book. I suppose you want me to prove it, don't you? You want me to prove it? Just wait there. Just one cotton picking second. Here it be. Read that very carefully. Well, I suppose I could have opened it. This was actually given to my father. I know you'll all go, but his name's not the same as yours. It was actually given to my father in 1947. I forgot that. So this has a certain thing. In Search of England. This is the record of a motor car journey around England. Any virtue it possesses and all its sins spring from the fact that it was written without deliberation, by the roadside, on farmyard walls, in cathedrals, in little churchyards, on the washstands of country inns, and in any other inconvenient place. I have gone round England like a magpie, picking up any bright thing that pleased me. A glance at the route followed will prove that this is not a guidebook, and a glance at the contents will expose me to the scorn of local patriots, who will see me, with incredulous rage, that on many occasions I passed silently through their favourite village. That was inevitable. It was a moody holiday, and I followed the roads. Some of them led me straight and some astray. The first were the most useful, the others were the most interesting. A writer on England today addresses himself to the wider and more intelligent public than ever before, and the reason is, I think, that never before have so many people been in search of England. The remarkable system of motor coach services, which now penetrates every part of the country, has thrown open to ordinary people regions which even after the coming of the railways were remote and inaccessible. The popularity of cheap motor car is also greatly responsible for this long overdue interest in English history, antiquities and topography. More people than in any previous generation are seeing the real country for the first time. Many hundreds of explorers return home with new enthusiasm. The roads of England, eclipsed for a century by the railway, have come to life again. The King's Highway is once more a place for adventure and explorations, and I would venture to prophesy that within the next few years we shall see a decline in the popularity of the seaside resort, unfortunate as this may be, and a revival of the country inn. The danger of this, as every lover of England knows, is the vulgarisation of the countryside. I have seen charabanc parties from the large manufacturing towns providing a mournful text on the essay of progress, playing cornets on village greens, and behaving with a barbaric lack of manners, which might have been outrageous had it not been unconscious and therefore only pathetic. This, however, is exceptional. The average townsman of no matter what class feels a deep love for the country and finds there is no answer to an ancient instinct. He goes on. In search of England. Yes, very, very twee, I thought. I've sort of got a fair way through this. There's lots of sort of inconsequential chatter, really. So this is a queer old book, so to speak. But yes, given to my father. So this will be interesting. When was that first written? I think that was written in the... I don't know whether it says when it was first published. This book was first issued on June 2nd, 1927, and since then has been in print 34 times. 1927, 1939... So this is 12 years later than this. Interesting. Bravo, Richard. It's a great book. Thank you. I would say that you're in the right vein of tongue there, Richard. It does come over like that, doesn't it? It's very Middle English, middle class, and a bit Oxbridge too. I say, old chap, I think you're jolly well right, you know. I think you're spot on. I only got about 2 hours sleep last night. I'm thinking I'm ramped up about the lumbar epidural I get today. I say, I hope the lumbar epidural goes all right, old man. Old girl. It does sound rather ghastly. The closest book to my desk was the complete works of Charles Dickens. Oh, there we go. Oh dear, Lisa, I hope you're better and feeling... I've got into the whole 1940s thing now. I hope it'll be much better this time. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Stiff upper lip, old girl. I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. You'll have a spiffing time. As soon as you see that needle, you'll just swoon. Of course you will. There you are. Little bit of a prep talk and you'll be absolutely fine. Marvellous. Just think of England. That's all you need think of. Anyway, enough of this gay banter. I say, it's a queer do, isn't it? It is a queer do. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back again tomorrow, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And I will get myself into my I need to find some 1940s clothes, really, so I could do it a little bit more fun. Hey-ho. Anyway, lovely to see you. Thank you very much. I'll catch up with you anon. Toodles, as they say. Got to find where my mouse is. Oh, yes. And now to end the stream. Goodbye.